No one walked past her house after sunset. No one dared to look into her eyes. In the village of Nyakwe, she was known by one name, Mama Kifo, the woman who lived at the edge of the world. They said she spoke to the dead, that shadows followed her even in broad daylight. That if you crossed her, you wouldn't wake up the next morning. No one tested the rumors. No one, except Wanjola. A proud man, fresh from the city, he laughed at the villagers' warnings. Witchcraft, he scoffed. In this century, you people need education. He moved into the abandoned house next to Mama Kifo's, chopping down the wild trees that had grown untouched for decades. He played loud music at night, disturbing the silence that had long kept the village safe. Mama Kifo watched from her darkened window. She never said a word. But one night, as Wanjola lay in bed, he heard it. One night, Wanjola heard a knock at his door. When he opened it, no one was there. Only the distant sound of a baby crying, though he knew no babies lived nearby. He shut the door and went to bed, dismissing it as a prank. The next morning, his livestock were dead. Every single one of them, their throats slit, yet not a drop of blood in sight. Still, Wanjola refused to believe. Thieves, he muttered. It has nothing to do with that old woman. That night, the knocking returned. But this time, when he opened the door, he saw footprints, wet and red, leading into his house. He slammed the door shut. The following days were a nightmare. Wanjola heard whispers inside his house, calling his name. His food rotted within hours. His own shadow seemed to move differently from his body. One evening, he caught his reflection in the mirror, but it did not blink when he did. Wanjola sat up in bed, his heart pounding. The room was silent except for the sound of his own breathing. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it around the small, dark room. Nothing. He exhaled sharply. Just the wind, he muttered. Then, knock. 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 This time, the sound came from his bedroom door. A chill ran down his spine. He stood up, gripping the nearest object, a wooden stool. He wasn't afraid. No, he refused to be. With one swift move, he yanked open the door. No one was there. But the corridor wasn't empty. Wet, muddy footprints trailed from his front door, leading straight into his room. Yet the floor was dry. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision. He turned sharply, nothing. His breath grew heavy. He was imagining things. Maybe he was just tired. He slammed the door shut, locking it, and crawled back into bed. He wouldn't let superstitions get to him. That night, Wanjola dreamt of Mama Kifo. She was standing at the foot of his bed, staring at him with dark, sunken eyes. Her mouth moved, but no words came out, only a hollow, whispering sound, like wind through dead leaves. Then, her face changed. Her skin peeled back like paper, revealing a gaping void where her mouth should be. And from that darkness, Wanjola heard his own voice screaming. He woke up drenched in sweat. His throat felt raw, as if he had actually been screaming. He gasped for air, gripping his bedsheets. It was just a dream. Just a dream. But then he heard it. A faint, raspy whisper. You don't believe, but you should. His blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming from his head. It was coming from the corner of the room. He turned slowly. There, crouched in the darkness, was a shadow that did not belong to him. Morning came, but Wanjola barely felt the warmth of the sun. He staggered out of his house, exhausted, his body trembling. He needed answers. He needed help. He found the village elder sitting under the big baobab tree, chewing on a stick of sugarcane. I need to know about Mama Kifo, Wanjola said, his voice hoarse. Who is she? The elder exhaled slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. She was once like us, he finally said. A mother, a wife. Until the night her child was taken from her. Taken. Wanjola frowned. They accused her of things, dark things. Drove her out of the village. That night, her house burned. Her child was inside. Wanjola felt his stomach drop. She returned days later, the elder continued, but she was not the same. His eyes darkened. She no longer belonged to the living. Wanjola swallowed hard. And the footprints, the voice in my house. The elder met his gaze. She is warning you. Wanjola laughed dryly, though there was no humor in it. Warning me of what? The elder's expression turned grim. That it is already too late. Desperate, he went to the village elders. She has cursed me, he cried. Mama Kifo is a witch. The elders only shook their heads. We warned you. Wanjola, now desperate, decided to confront her. Armed with a machete, he stormed to her house and kicked open the door. Enough of your games, old woman, he roared. But Mama Kifo only smiled, a slow, eerie smile that revealed yellow teeth. You don't believe in witches, she whispered, stepping closer. So why are you afraid? Wanjola raised his machete, but before he could swing, the room went dark. And then, silence. The next morning, Wanjola's house was empty. His belongings were there, his clothes folded neatly on the bed. But Wanjola himself was gone. Some say he ran away in fear. Others say Mama Kifo took him. But on certain nights, when the wind is just right, villagers swear they hear a voice whispering from inside her house.